Every morning at Fort Campbell, while most soldiers grabbed coffee and complained about the Kentucky heat, Maya Jensen quietly organized supply shelves in the logistics depot. By 0630 hours, she'd have already completed her first inventory check of the day, her movements methodical and precise despite the slight tremor in her hands. The morning ritual held meaning for her, creating order from chaos, ensuring every soldier had what they needed when they needed it. The other soldiers barely noticed her. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. To the men and women of Echo Company, Maya was just the supply clerk with the shaky hands, the quiet woman who processed their requisition forms, maintained inventory records, and occasionally helped distribute standard issue equipment. Captain Reynolds, the company commander, treated her like furniture that occasionally needed to be moved. Jensen, make sure those MRE shipments are logged before the afternoon briefing. He would bark, never bothering to look at her directly. And don't touch the armory requisitions. Those are for qualified personnel only. Maya would nod silently, returning to her clipboard and inventory sheets. She'd check each supply crate with remarkable attention to detail, her trembling fingers moving with practiced familiarity across serial numbers and quantity fields. The soldiers who watched assumed it was just thoroughness. They had no idea she was mentally calculating supply chain efficiencies that could mean life or death in combat situations. During lunch breaks, while others gathered around picnic tables, sharing stories about weekend plans, Maya sat alone reviewing logistics manuals or gazing at the distant Kentucky hills that reminded her of deployments long past. She'd grown up in the Montana wilderness, where her grandfather had taught her that preparation meant survival and attention to detail meant everything. "Hey, Jensen," called out Sergeant James Donovan, a cocky 28-year-old from Boston who'd barely passed his last physical fitness test. "You ever actually see combat with those shaky hands, or do you just count boxes all day?" His buddies laughed. Maya looked up from her inventory sheets, offered a small smile, and returned to her work. Let them think what they wanted. Her grandfather had always told her that true warriors never needed to boast about their accomplishments. The truth was, Maya Jensen had been handling life and death situations since she was 22 years old. For 3 consecutive deployments, she had served in a capacity so classified that even she was prohibited from discussing the details with anyone without proper clearance. But the Army didn't care about her previous service record after her medical review. They cared about her tremor, the subtle but persistent shake in her hands that had developed after her last deployment, and the paperwork that now classified her as non-combat personnel. So she accepted the role they gave her. Invisible support staff who maintained supplies for real soldiers. The irony wasn't lost on her. She watched them struggle with basic tactical planning while she could orchestrate complex supply chains in her sleep. Some complained about minor inconveniences that would have seemed luxurious during her deployments. But she remained silent, did her job, and served without recognition. Captain Reynolds seemed to take particular pleasure in reminding her of her place. "You're a supply clerk, Jensen. Your job is logistics, not tactics. Leave the planning to people who actually know what they're doing in the field." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. What Reynolds didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Maya's quiet demeanor wasn't from incompetence or fear. It was from discipline. Her grandfather had taught her that true warriors didn't boast about their skills. They simply performed when performance mattered. And deep down, Maya suspected that day was coming soon. The rumors started 3 weeks later, spreading through the barracks like wildfire. Word was that Maya had embarrassed herself during a routine field exercise. Sergeant Donovan, who seemed to make it his personal mission to ensure everyone knew about her supposed inadequacies, was more than happy to share the details. "Basic land navigation," he announced during chow hall, loud enough for half the dining facility to hear. She couldn't find her way out of a paper bag. Reynolds had to send someone to retrieve her because she was so lost. The story grew with each telling. By the time it reached the motor pool, Maya had supposedly panicked in the field. By evening formation, she'd allegedly broken down crying. When faced with a simple orienteering challenge, the narrative was always the same. The supply clerk, who thought she could play with the big boys, had been humiliated. Captain Reynolds did nothing to discourage the gossip. If anything, he seemed to enjoy it. "Jensen's good at one thing," he'd tell anyone who'd listen: keeping inventory sheets organized. But actual field operations, that's a different skill set entirely. What none of them noticed was how Maya reacted when she watched their training sessions. Every time a soldier made an obvious tactical error, her jaw would tighten almost imperceptibly. When they struggled with basic field operations or failed to account for contingencies, she'd frown slightly, like someone watching a mechanic use the wrong tool for a simple job. Lieutenant Sarah Coleman, the intelligence officer recently transferred from Fort Bragg, was one of the few who paid attention. A former Special Operations Support staff, she recognized competence when she saw it. "You know something about tactical operations?" Sarah said one afternoon, finding Maya organizing supply requisitions in the logistics office. It wasn't a question. Maya looked up, meeting her eyes for a moment before returning to her work. "I know how to organize supplies for them." "That's not what I meant." Sarah pulled up a chair. "Yesterday, when Donovan was planning that convoy route, you shook your head before he even finished his briefing. You knew he was choosing a vulnerable approach." "How? Lucky guess." "No," Sarah said firmly. "You were reading the terrain map, calculating choke points and fields of fire. I saw you marking alternative routes in your head. My husband used to do the same thing when he was with 5th Group." Maya's hand stilled on the inventory sheet. For just a moment, her careful mask slipped, and Sarah caught a glimpse of something deeper. Knowledge, experience, maybe even pain. "Your husband sounds like a wise man," Maya said finally. That evening, Sarah's curiosity got the better of her. She had access to personnel files through her intelligence role, and something about Maya Jensen didn't add up. The woman was too calm, too knowledgeable, too tactical in her thinking to be just a supply clerk. The file was mostly standard information: basic training records, technical school completion, duty assignments, but buried in the electronic records was a single line that made Sarah's blood run cold. "Restricted, Operation Sandstone deployments under Colonel L. Richards, clearance level, top secret, SCI." Sarah stared at the screen. Colonel Leah Richards. Everyone in military intelligence knew that name. The mastermind behind Operation Sandstone, the COUND, Operation Sandstone. Classified counter-terrorism task force with the highest enemy kill count and lowest friendly casualty rate in modern military history. One of the most decorated intelligence officers in recent Army history. What was a supply clerk with trembling hands doing with deployment records connected to a legendary colonel? Before she could dig deeper, the file locked her out, but the seed was planted. Maya Jensen wasn't who she appeared to be, and Sarah had a feeling that everyone on this base was about to find out exactly who they'd been underestimating. The next morning brought news that would change everything. Fort Campbell was hosting a distinguished visitor, and there would be a field training exercise that had half the base's tactical planners nervous and excited. None of them suspected that the quiet woman cataloging supply requisitions was about to turn their world upside down. The announcement came during morning formation, delivered by Colonel Harrison himself. "Attention! We have the honor of hosting Colonel Leah Richards tomorrow for a tactical response exercise. This is an opportunity to showcase the exceptional planning and capability of Fort Campbell's finest operators. Echo Company will provide the demonstration team. A buzz of excitement rippled through the ranks. Colonel Richards was a living legend, the architect of impossible victories and the kind of officer that other officers told stories about. For most of them, this would be the chance of a lifetime. Captain Reynolds practically glowed with anticipation. This was his company, his show, his moment to shine in front of military royalty. He spent the rest of the day making preparations, selecting his best tacticians, and ensuring everything would be perfect. "Jensen," he barked as Maya organized field rations for the exercise. "I want every supply item accounted for tomorrow. And stay in the talk during the demonstration. This is for qualified personnel only." "Understood, Captain." But Reynolds wasn't finished. Over the next few hours, his casual dismissiveness evolved into something more pointed, more cruel. Maybe it was the pressure of the upcoming demonstration. Or maybe he'd simply decided that having a disabled supply clerk on his team was an embarrassment he couldn't tolerate. "You know what, Jensen?" he said, loud enough for everyone in the operations center to hear. "Maybe you should just stay back at base tomorrow. I don't want our distinguished visitor seeing someone who can barely hold a pen without shaking, much less perform in the field. It might reflect poorly on the unit." The room went quiet. This wasn't just casual teasing anymore. Reynolds was publicly humiliating her. Several soldiers looked uncomfortable, but none spoke up. The chain of command was sacred, and challenging a company commander wasn't something lieutenants and sergeants did lightly. Maya's hands never stopped moving as she organized the supply manifests. But Sarah noticed her knuckles had gone white around the clipboard. "Actually," Reynolds continued, warming to his theme, "I'm thinking we need to have a conversation with the battalion commander about your continued assignment to this company. Someone who can't control their own hands probably shouldn't be maintaining critical supply chains." Now he'd crossed a line threatening her job, her career, her ability to serve. That was more than casual harassment. That was destroying someone's livelihood out of petty cruelty. Maya set down her clipboard and looked up at Reynolds for the first time in weeks. When she spoke, her voice was calm, but there was something underneath it that made several people in the room shift uncomfortably. "Captain, I'll be there tomorrow as ordered. Maintaining supplies is my assigned duty, and I take my duties seriously." "Your duties," Reynolds sneered, "are whatever I say they are. And tomorrow, your duty is to stay invisible and let real soldiers do real work." That night, Maya sat alone in her quarters, staring at a framed photo of her grandfather. He had taught her that some battles chose you, whether you wanted them or not. He'd also taught her that when those battles came, you fought them with honor, precision, and absolute commitment. She opened her footlocker and pulled out something she hadn't touched in months. A hard case containing her personal journal, filled with tactical analyses and operational planning notes from her previous deployments. The pages were covered with her precise handwriting, written before the tremors, began detailing lessons learned through blood and fire. Tomorrow, Colonel Richards would be watching. And whether Reynolds liked it or not, Maya Jensen was going to be there, ready to serve her country in whatever capacity was required. She'd spent months being invisible, accepting disrespect, tolerating humiliation, but tomorrow was different. Tomorrow she had a feeling her country might need her to be more than just a supply clerk. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory. "Real warriors don't boast about their skills, Maya. They just perform when performance matters." Tomorrow, performance would matter. And Captain Reynolds was about to learn that some people's silence wasn't weakness. It was discipline, waiting for the right moment to be unleashed. The morning of the exercise dawned clear and cold, perfect conditions for field operations. Maya arrived at the Tactical Operations Center before anyone else, as usual. Today, she carried her personal notebook alongside her standard clipboard. She set up her supply station at the edge of the command tent, just as Reynolds had ordered. but her eyes kept drifting to the tactical maps spread across the planning table. By 0900 hours, Eco Company's best tactical planners had assembled. The competition was elite. Lieutenant Rodriguez, fresh from the advanced leadership course. Sergeant First Class Williamson, with 3 combat deployments as a platoon sergeant. Captain Reynolds himself, strutting around like a peacock, inspecting equipment and barking orders. "Remember, people," Reynolds said, "we're representing the entire base today. I expect nothing less than perfection." At 0957 hours, an armored SUV pulled up to the command post. Colonel Leah Richards stepped out, and every soldier snapped to attention. She was smaller than Maya had expected, maybe 5'6", with silver-streaked dark hair and a lined face that spoke of decades making impossible decisions. Her chest displayed ribbons that read like a history of American military operations over the past 30 years. But what struck Maya most was her eyes. They swept across the assembled planners with professional assessment, then landed on her. For just a moment, so brief that anyone else would have missed it, something flickered in her expression. Recognition? Surprise? Maya couldn't tell. "At ease," Richard said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that came from leading men and women through hell and bringing them home alive. "I'm here to observe, not interfere. Please continue with your demonstration." The exercise began with a tactical challenge. Plan a complex extraction operation for a high-value asset in hostile territory with minimal resources and multiple threat vectors. One by one, Eco Company's finest took their positions at the FIMU planning table and attempted to formulate a viable strategy. Lieutenant Rodriguez went first. His plan involved a direct approach with overwhelming force. As he explained his tactical reasoning, Maya's trembling hand jotted notes in her small notebook. Captain Reynolds shot her an irritated glance but said nothing. Rodriguez's proposal hit a major snag when Colonel Richards pointed out that his approach would expose the extraction team to unnecessary risk from 3 different directions. "Impressive aggression, Lieutenant, but you've just lost half your team before reaching the objective." Captain Reynolds followed with his own strategy, managing to address some of the weaknesses in Rodriguez's plan, but creating new vulnerabilities in the process. Each mistake brought a tighter frown to Richard's face. This was supposed to be a showcase, not a demonstration of tactical blunders. Sergeant First Class Williamson stepped up for his attempt, and Maya found herself unconsciously analyzing his plan, her eyes darting between the map's terrain features and the available resources. His plan would never work. He'd positioned his blocking forces too far from the extraction route, leaving a critical 3-minute window where the team would be completely exposed. "Challenging conditions," Colonel Richards observed mildly after. The third failed plan, but Maya caught the undertone. She wasn't impressed. As the planning continued with soldier after soldier, failing to develop a strategy that would ensure mission success and personnel safety, Maya noticed something else. Colonel Richards' attention kept drifting to her. Not obviously, the woman was too professional for that, but Maya had spent enough time being invisible to recognize when someone was quietly observing her. Finally, after 6 attempts and 0 viable plans, Reynolds was sweating despite the cool morning air. "Ma'am, these are exceptionally difficult parameters. The terrain features limit our options," and Richards interrupted gently. "I've seen successful extractions planned in conditions that would make today look like a training exercise. The issue isn't the parameters." The rebuke was polite, but devastating. Reynolds's face went red, and Maya could see him scrambling for a way to salvage the situation. That's when Richards looked directly at her for the first time. "Specialist, you've been watching very intently. What's your assessment of the tactical situation?" Every head in the command tent turned to stare at Maya. Reynolds looked like he might have a stroke. "Ma'am, she's just supply." "She doesn't." "I asked her, Captain." Richards's tone was still mild. but it carried the weight of command that made Reynolds shut his mouth immediately. Maya stood slowly, her heart pounding, but her voice steady. "The key vulnerability is in the northeastern approach, ma'am. The ridge creates a natural funnel that would concentrate our forces exactly where hostile elements would expect them." She stepped forward, her trembling hand hovering over the map. "If we instead create a diversion here," her finger tapped the western sector, "while extracting through these 3 ravines in staggered team movements, we maintain operational security while presenting multiple potential targets, none of which would be the actual high-value package." A murmur ran through the assembled soldiers. This was technical language that most of them had never heard from a supply clerk. Reynolds looked like he'd been slapped. Colonel Richards nodded slowly. "Interesting assessment. Very detailed." She paused, studying Maya's face. "What's your name, soldier?" "Specialist Maya Jensen, ma'am." "Well, Specialist Jensen, since you seem to understand the situation so well, perhaps you'd like to demonstrate a complete tactical plan." The suggestion hit the command tent like a thunderbolt. Reynolds started to sputter an objection, but Richards's raised hand silenced him immediately. Maya felt every eye in the tent boring into her. This was the moment her grandfather had prepared her for without either of them knowing it. The moment when quiet competence would be tested against loud assumptions. "I'd be honored, ma'am," she said quietly. Maya walked to the planning table with the deliberate calm of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. As she spread her notebook open, revealing pages of precise tactical notations and contingency planning, a hush fell over the tent. These weren't the random scribblings of an amateur. These were the organized thoughts of someone who understood complex operations at a fundamental level. "I'll be damned," whispered Lieutenant Rodriguez. "Those are professional op plans." Reynolds found his voice. "Ma'am, I have to protest. She's not qualified for tactical planning. There are protocols." "Captain," Colonel Richards's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. "I've made my decision. Stand down." Maya began outlining her plan, and immediately every experienced tactician in the tent could see the difference. Her approach wasn't just competent, it was innovative. She split the extraction team into 3 elements, each with distinct but complementary objectives. She created layered distractions that would draw attention away from the actual extraction. Most impressively, she incorporated multiple contingency triggers that would automatically shift the operation if certain parameters changed. Despite the tremor in her hands, her mind was rock steady. She outlined primary routes, secondary extractions, communication protocols, and threat responses with the confidence of a seasoned operations planner. "The key," Maya explained, "isn't just getting the high-value asset out. It's ensuring the extraction doesn't appear to be an extraction at all. By creating the impression of a completely different operation in the western sector, we mask our true intentions while simultaneously drawing enemy resources away from our actual objective." Colonel Richards studied the plan in silence. The tension in the tent was palpable. Finally, she looked up. "Textbook perfect," she said simply. "One of the most elegant extraction plans I've seen in years." The silence stretched another heartbeat, then exploded into chaos. Soldiers were talking all at once, asking how this was possible, demanding to know who Jensen really was. But Maya barely heard them. She was watching Colonel Richards, who had stood up from her chair and was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Reynolds looked like he'd been hit by a truck. That was just theoretical knowledge. Anyone can read a manual, and—" "Captain," Colonel Richards interrupted, her voice carrying across the tent with absolute authority, "that plan tells me everything I need to know." She stepped forward, and when she spoke again, her voice was loud enough for everyone to hear. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce Captain Maya Jensen, formerly of Operation Sandstone and the primary tactical planner responsible for the successful extraction of 37 high-value intelligence." assets during deployments that remain classified to this day. The effect was immediate and devastating. Every person in that tent knew about Operation Sandstone, the legendary counter-terrorism task force whose exploits had become mythical in military circles, and they'd been mocking its architect for months. Sandstone, someone whispered. Jesus Christ, she's the ghost planner. Maya remained perfectly still by the tactical table, but her hands were trembling more noticeably now. She'd spent 2 years trying to bury that part of her life, trying to find peace in the simple structure of supply work and invisible service. Now it was all coming back. Colonel Richards continued, her voice carrying the weight of absolute truth. During Operation Sandstone, Captain Jensen provided tactical planning for 23 successful high-risk operations while hostile forces had our intelligence networks compromised. She created extraction plans so innovative that many are now taught at the Command and General Staff College as case studies in asymmetrical tactical thinking. Reynolds had gone completely pale. Around the tent, soldiers were putting pieces together, remembering every joke they'd made, every dismissive comment, every time they treated her like she didn't belong. But the psychological cost, Richards continued, was significant. Planning operations that put lives at risk, even enemy combatants, affected her deeply. The stress manifested physically. Maya finally spoke, her voice quiet but clear enough for everyone to hear. The tremors started after the Jalabat extraction. 3 of our people didn't make it back. I'd planned that operation down to the second, but intelligence was compromised. I still see their faces every night. Why didn't you tell us? Lieutenant Rodriguez asked, and for the first time since she'd known him, his voice held genuine respect instead of mockery. Because past achievements don't determine present worth, Maya replied. I wanted to be valued for who I am now, not who I used to be. Colonel Richards nodded approvingly. That's exactly the attitude that made her exceptional in the first place. Humility combined with extraordinary skill. The transformation in the group was complete. These soldiers finally understood that the quiet woman they'd dismissed possessed tactical knowledge that exceeded their collective training. More than that, they understood they'd been privileged to work alongside genuine brilliance and had been too blind to see it. Captain Reynolds stood frozen, realizing that his career had just taken a hit from which it might never recover. He'd spent months humiliating a decorated intelligence officer, and he'd done it in front of witnesses. But Maya wasn't looking at Reynolds anymore. She was looking at the soldiers who had begun approaching her with genuine respect, asking technical questions, seeking guidance from someone they finally recognized as their superior in every way that mattered. The planning session had been perfect, but more importantly, it had revealed the character of everyone present. Within hours, word of the demonstration had spread throughout Fort Campbell like wildfire. The story grew with each telling, but for once, the embellishments didn't diminish the truth. They simply couldn't match it. By evening chow, every soldier on the base knew that they'd been sharing their facility with a genuine war hero. Colonel Harrison requested an immediate meeting with all personnel involved in the morning's events. The conference room felt smaller than usual as Reynolds, Maya, Colonel Richards, and the witnessing soldiers filed in. Harrison's expression was carefully neutral, but experienced soldiers could read the storm brewing behind his eyes. Captain Reynolds, Harrison began without preamble. I've received several reports about your conduct regarding Specialist Jensen. Would you care to explain why you've been publicly humiliating a decorated intelligence officer? Reynolds's career flashed before his eyes. Sir, her personnel file didn't indicate. I had no knowledge of her previous service. Her file, Colonel Richards interjected, was classified for operational security reasons. But that doesn't explain why you thought it was appropriate to mock any soldier under your command, regardless of their background. Harrison leaned forward. Captain, I've also received reports that you threatened Specialist, or rather, Captain Jensen's career and suggested she be removed from her position. Is this accurate? The room was silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights. Reynolds knew he was finished. Yes, sir, I made those statements. On what grounds? I believed she was unqualified for her position. Lieutenant Rodriguez, who'd been one of Reynolds's most enthusiastic supporters in mocking Maya, cleared his throat. Sir, if I may. Captain Reynolds never gave Captain Jensen a chance to demonstrate her abilities. None of us did. We assumed that because she was quiet and worked in supply, she was somehow lesser. The admission took courage, and Maya felt a grudging respect for the young officer, who was essentially confessing his own prejudice to save what remained of Reynolds's dignity. Colonel Harrison turned to Maya. Captain Jensen, why didn't you report this harassment through proper channels? Maya had been dreading this question. Sir, I was trying to serve quietly. I hoped that if I did my job well and stayed out of the way, the situation would resolve itself. That's not how the Army works, soldier. When you're being mistreated, you have an obligation to speak up. Not just for yourself, but for every soldier who might face similar treatment in the future. Colonel Richards spoke up. Colonel, if I may, Captain Jensen's approach to dealing with adversity has always been unique. During Operation Sandstone, she volunteered for the most stressful planning position, coordinated 23 high-risk operations, and then refused accommodation because she said she was just doing her job. She's never been comfortable with recognition. Nevertheless, Harrison continued, this situation is unacceptable. Captain Reynolds, you're relieved of your position as company commander, effective immediately. You'll report to the battalion executive officer for reassignment and counseling. Your fitness report will reflect today's revelations. Reynolds nodded stiffly. His career wasn't over, but it had just taken a devastating hit that would follow him for years. Captain Jensen, Harrison continued, I'm recommending you for immediate reinstatement to your previous rank and reassignment to a position more appropriate for your experience level. We also need to discuss correcting your service record to properly reflect your intelligence experience. Sir, Maya said carefully, I requested the transfer to supply work. I'm content with my current position. Content or not, the Army has invested significant resources in your training, and we're not utilizing your capabilities effectively. Colonel Richards, do you have any recommendations? Richards smiled slightly. Actually, I do. The Army's intelligence school has been looking for experienced personnel to develop new tactical planning protocols. Someone with Captain Jensen's combination of operational experience and innovative thinking would be invaluable. The suggestion hung in the air. It would mean leaving Fort Campbell, leaving the quiet supply work she'd found peaceful, and returning to a world that revolved around high-stakes planning. But it would also mean helping other soldiers develop skills that might save their lives someday. Maya looked around the room at the faces of soldiers who'd spent months dismissing her, who now looked at her with respect and something approaching awe. She thought about her grandfather's lessons about service, about using your gifts to help others. I'd be honored to consider such an assignment, ma'am. As the meeting concluded, soldiers filed out quietly, many stopping to offer Maya personal apologies. Rodriguez lingered longest. Ma'am, I owe you more than an apology. I was wrong about everything, and I'm ashamed of how I acted. Maya studied his face, seeing genuine remorse. We all make assumptions, Lieutenant. The question is what we do when we discover we're wrong. I'd like to learn from you, if you're willing to teach. Everyone deserves a second chance to prove their character, she replied, including me. 3 weeks later, Maya found herself at Fort Huachuca, Arizona, walking through the halls of the Army Intelligence Center. The building hummed with quiet intensity. This was where the military's most elite intelligence professionals came to learn the craft of information gathering, analysis, and operational planning. Colonel Sandra Mercer, the intelligence school commander, greeted her personally. A tall woman with keen eyes and a reputation for demanding excellence. She had read Maya's complete file, including the classified portions that had remained hidden at Fort Campbell. "Captain Jensen," she said, using Maya's reinstated rank, "I'll be honest with you. When Colonel Richards recommended you for this position, I had questions. Teaching advanced tactical planning isn't just about knowing the theories. It's about understanding how to transfer complex skills to intelligence officers who may never have your natural ability." They walked through the facility, past classrooms where students practiced with sophisticated intelligence tools and simulation environments. Through observation windows, Maya watched instructors working with small groups, demonstrating techniques that she recognized from her time with Operation Sandstone. "Your assignment," Mercer continued, "will be developing curriculum for what we're calling the Asymmetrical Planning Initiative. Too many of our intelligence officers have excellent analytical skills, but lack the creative thinking needed for modern, asymmetrical threats. Based on your operational record and your innovative approach to extraction planning, we think you might have insights that could benefit the entire program." Maya paused at a window overlooking a tactical simulation room, where students were attempting to plan a complex border crossing operation. She could see immediately what they were doing wrong, focusing too much on technical details and missing the human factors that would make or break the mission. "Permission to ask a question, ma'am?" "Of course. Are we training them to be better planners or better people?" Mercer stopped walking. The question cut to the heart of something she'd been wrestling with throughout her career. What's the difference? A tactical planner focuses on completing the objective. A good intelligence officer focuses on the people involved, our teams, our assets, even our adversaries. The difference is everything. For the first time since they'd met, Mercer smiled. "Colonel Richards said you'd have a unique perspective." I think she understated it. Over the following weeks, Maya threw herself into her new role with the same quiet intensity she'd brought to supply work. But now, instead of organizing inventory, she was developing training protocols that emphasized ethical decision-making alongside tactical brilliance. Her first class consisted of 12 officers, all experienced intelligence professionals who'd been selected for advanced training. Lieutenant Commander Rachel Santos, recently arrived from Naval Intelligence, looked skeptical as Maya introduced herself. "I'm not here to teach you how to plan operations," Maya began. "You already know how to do that. I'm here to teach you how to think while you're planning." She led them through exercises that had nothing to do with map coordinates or asset management, understanding the psychological impact of operations on both friendly and hostile forces, calculating the long-term consequences of intelligence actions, recognizing when a tactically sound plan might be strategically or ethically problematic. "Every plan has consequences beyond the immediate objective," she explained during one session. "In intelligence operations, you're not just moving pieces on a board. You're making decisions that affect lives, communities, sometimes entire regions. The technical skill is meaningless without the wisdom to use it appropriately." Lieutenant Commander Santos approached her after the third day of training. "Ma'am, this isn't like any intelligence course I've ever taken." "Good. How do you feel about that?" "Honestly, it's harder than I expected. You're making us think about things that most instructors never mention. Like yesterday when you asked us to describe the difference between a justified intelligence operation and a necessary one." "I've been thinking about that for 18 hours. Maya nodded. "That's the point. Anyone can learn to gather intelligence. But knowing when to act on that intelligence and when to choose a different course of action, that's what separates good officers from exceptional ones." Word of her unconventional teaching methods spread quickly through the military intelligence community. Other instructors began requesting copies of her curriculum. Senior officers who'd heard about the ethical planner started attending her sessions as observers. But the real validation came from her students. Officers who completed her program didn't just create better operational plans. They made better decisions under pressure. They understood their role in the larger mission. They carried themselves with the quiet confidence that came from knowing they were prepared for whatever their country might ask of them. Late one evening, as Maya reviewed student assessments from her latest class, she found a handwritten note that had been slipped under her office door. "Ma'am, my husband always said that the best intelligence officers are the ones who understand the human cost of every decision. Thank you for helping me understand that being an officer is about more than being clever." Maya smiled, recognizing the handwriting as Lieutenant Sarah Coleman's. Sarah had transferred to Fort Washuka specifically to take her course, having been one of the few people at Fort Campbell who'd recognized there was more to Maya than met the eye. As she turned off her office lights and headed to her quarters, Maya reflected on the strange path that had brought her here. From wilderness training with her grandfather through the hell of Operation Sandstone to the quiet service of supply work, and now to shaping the next generation of military intelligence officers. Each phase had taught her something different about service, about sacrifice, about the responsibility that came with exceptional skills. But perhaps the most important lesson was one her grandfather had taught her years ago. True strength wasn't about how much force you could bring to bear. It was about knowing when force was necessary and when wisdom was more powerful. Tomorrow would bring new students, new challenges, new opportunities to serve. But tonight, she was content knowing that her grandfather's lessons lived on in every officer she trained, and that sometimes the most important operations were the ones that never had to happen because someone planned wisely. 6 months into her assignment at Fort Huachuca, Maya received an unexpected visitor. She was reviewing student proposals in her office when her assistant knocked on the door. "Ma'am, Colonel Richards is here to see you." Colonel Richards entered with the same quiet authority Maya remembered from Fort Campbell, but now her face carried a smile of genuine pride. "Captain Jensen, I hope you don't mind the unannounced visit. I was passing through and wanted to see how you were settling in." They walked through the facility together, observing classes in session. In one room, students were practicing what Maya called multi-dimensional planning exercises that required them to balance tactical objectives, ethical considerations, and long-term strategic impacts. "Your program has generated quite a bit of discussion in Pentagon circles," Richards observed. "Initial assessments suggest that officers completing your training show 50% better decision-making under stress compared to traditional intelligence programs." Maya watched through the observation window as one of her students, faced with a complex ethical dilemma during a simulation, chose to delay an operation rather than risk civilian casualties. Exactly the kind of thoughtful decision-making she'd been trying to instill. "Ma'am, I've been thinking about something you said at Fort Campbell about the cost of operations and choosing when to implement a plan and when to seek alternatives. Go on. I think I spent years believing that my value as an intelligence officer was tied to my ability to create brilliant tactical plans. But what I'm learning here is that my real value might be in teaching others to think before they act." Richards nodded slowly. "Operation Sandstone was necessary, Maya. What you did saved lives. But you're right, teaching officers to make better decisions might save even more lives in the long run." They paused outside a classroom where Lieutenant Commander Santos was leading a discussion about intelligence ethics. The conversation was complex, nuanced, exactly the kind of thinking that separated professional intelligence officers from mere technicians. "There's something else," Richards continued. "The Army is considering expanding your program military-wide. They want to integrate ethical decision-making and psychological preparation into all advanced intelligence training." The implications hit Maya immediately. Her grandfather's lessons learned in the Montana wilderness, refined through intelligence operations and tempered by the wisdom that came from understanding the true cost of conflict, would become part of how America trained its intelligence community. Ma'am, that's an incredible responsibility. Yes, it is. But you've already proven you can handle incredible responsibilities. The question is whether you're ready to step into a larger role. We're talking about a promotion to major and assignment to head a new department, ethical intelligence operations. That evening, Maya sat in her small apartment, staring at the framed photo of her grandfather that had traveled with her from post to post. He died 2 years before her discharge from Operation Sandstone. Proud of his granddaughter, but worried about the burden she carried from those classified missions. Now she wondered what he'd think about this new opportunity. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Sarah Coleman. "Ma'am, heard the news about the program expansion. My entire section is requesting your training. You're changing how we think about being intelligence officers." More messages followed. Officers from her classes sharing stories about how her teaching had influenced their decisions in the field. Commanders reporting improved operational outcomes from personnel who'd completed her program. Even international allies expressing interest in her curriculum. The trembling in her hand seemed less pronounced tonight. The mountain girl who'd learned to track deer through silent forests had found her true calling, and it wasn't behind a tactical planning table. It was in teaching others to understand the full weight of their decisions. The next morning, Maya found herself back in the simulation room where she'd first observed students months earlier. But instead of watching from behind glass, she stood before a group of 30 intelligence officers from every branch of service, teaching them to see beyond objectives to consequences. "Remember," she told them, "intelligence isn't just about gathering information or creating brilliant plans. It's about understanding the human dimension of every operation. Your tactical brilliance is meaningless if you don't consider the ethical implications of your decisions." A young Army lieutenant raised his hand. "Ma'am, how do you balance mission objectives with ethical considerations when lives are at stake?" Maya smiled, hearing her grandfather's voice in the question. "You prepare beforehand by thinking through scenarios, understanding your values, and practicing good decision-making when the stakes are low. When the pressure hits, you don't rise to the occasion, you fall back on your level of preparation." As the class continued, Maya noticed movement at the edge of the room. Captain Reynolds from Fort Campbell was standing there, apparently having traveled to Fort Huachuca specifically to see her. When the training session ended, he approached hesitantly. "Ma'am, I know I have no right to ask for your time, but I was hoping we could talk." They walked to a quiet area overlooking the training facilities. Reynolds looked older, humbled by the events that had cost him his command and damaged his career. "I came to apologize," he said simply. "Not just for how I treated you, but for what I failed to learn from you. I spent months working alongside someone who could have made me a better officer, a better leader, a better person. Instead, I let my prejudices blind me to an opportunity that will never come again." Maya studied his face, seeing genuine remorse. "We all make mistakes, Captain. The question is what we do with the lessons they teach us. I've requested transfer to an intelligence training unit. I want to learn to teach officers the way you do, with respect, with understanding, with focus on making them better people, as well as better tacticians. That's a worthy goal." Reynolds hesitated, then continued. "Ma'am, there's something else. Lieutenant Rodriguez sends his regards. He completed the intelligence support course last month. Top of his class. He said your example taught him that quiet competence was more valuable than loud boasting." The conversation reminded Maya of something her grandfather had often said: "Influence spreads in ways you never expect." The lessons she'd learned in the Montana wilderness were now shaping officers across the military, creating ripples that would extend far beyond anything she could directly observe. As the sun set over Fort Huachuca, Maya made her decision about the promotion and expanded role. She would accept, not because she craved recognition or authority, but because her country needed intelligence officers who understood that true strength came from wisdom, restraint, and the courage to make difficult decisions under pressure. That night, she wrote a letter to her grandfather, as she did every year on the anniversary of his death. "Grandpa, remember how you used to say that the most important tracking wasn't following an animal, but understanding where it was going to be? I finally understand what you meant. Teaching officers to think clearly, act with honor, and choose their operations wisely, that might be the most important intelligence lesson of all. The wilderness lessons you taught me aren't just living on in me anymore. They're living on in every officer I train, and they'll live on in everyone those officers train in turn. Your legacy isn't just in the operations I planned during Sandstone. It's in all the unnecessary conflicts that won't happen because intelligence officers learned to think before they acted. I think you'd be proud of that." 6 months later, when the Army officially announced the new Department of Ethical Intelligence Operations, the press release included a quote from its director, Major Maya Jensen. "Our goal isn't to create better planners. It's to create better officers who understand that true intelligence extends far beyond gathering information. It includes wisdom in judgment, precision in decision-making, and clarity in understanding when operations are necessary and when alternative approaches are wiser." The trembling woman, who had once been dismissed as just a supply clerk, had become one of the most influential intelligence trainers in the modern military. But she still began each day the same way she had at Fort Campbell, with a moment of quiet reflection, honoring the lessons her grandfather had taught her about patience, wisdom, and service to something greater than herself. A year into her new role, Maya found herself facing an unexpected challenge. Her program had become so successful that it was attracting attention from the highest levels of government. The Secretary of Defense was scheduled to visit Fort Huachuca to observe her training methods firsthand, and expectations were high. Major Jensen, Colonel Mercer advised during their planning meeting, "The Secretary isn't just interested in theory. He wants to see practical application, how your ethical framework translates to real-world intelligence operations." Maya nodded thoughtfully. "Then we'll give him exactly that. Not a demonstration, but an actual planning session with real-world implications." The following week, as the Secretary's motorcade arrived at the Intelligence Center, Maya was ready. She had assembled a diverse team of her best graduates, Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines, and presented them with a genuine intelligence challenge that the Pentagon was currently wrestling with. "Mr. Secretary," Maya greeted him with quiet confidence, "welcome to Fort Huachuca. Today, we're not putting on a show. You'll be observing our officers tackling an actual situation in the South China Sea that your intelligence team flagged last week." The Secretary, a former Marine with a reputation for straight talk, raised an eyebrow. "Bold choice, Major. Most training programs would have prepared a scripted scenario." "With respect, sir, that's exactly the problem with most training programs. They script scenarios when real intelligence work is about navigating uncertainty." For the next 4 hours, the Secretary watched as Maya's team dissected the situation, analyzed multiple intelligence streams, developed potential operational plans, and most importantly evaluated the ethical, strategic, and human dimensions of each option. What impressed him most wasn't their technical proficiency, though that was exceptional. It was the thoughtfulness with which they considered consequences, not just immediate tactical outcomes, but long-term regional stability, civilian impacts, and diplomatic repercussions. When they finally presented their recommendation, a measured, multi-phased approach that prioritized de-escalation while maintaining preparedness for more aggressive options if needed, the Secretary sat in silence for a long moment. "Major Jensen," he said finally, "I've been sitting in intelligence briefings for 20 years. What I just witnessed was unlike anything I've seen before. These officers didn't just give me a plan, they gave me understanding." That evening, at a small reception following the demonstration, the Secretary pulled Maya aside. "I'll be blunt, Major. We need your approach at the national level. The President's daily brief includes intelligence from 16 agencies, but what's often missing is the ethical framework to evaluate that intelligence. I'm creating a new position, Special Advisor for Ethical Intelligence Assessment, and I want you for the job. Maya felt her hands trembling more than usual. Sir, that would be a significant change from training officers. It would, but think about the impact. Instead of influencing dozens of officers each year, you'd be shaping how intelligence is presented to the Commander-in-Chief, how decisions are framed that affect millions of lives. May I have some time to consider it? Of course. But not too much time. The world doesn't wait, Major. Back in her quarters, Maya stared at her grandfather's photo, her mind racing. This wasn't just a career opportunity, it was a fundamental shift in how she could serve. Not teaching others to make ethical decisions, but helping frame the nation's most crucial intelligence in ways that highlighted ethical dimensions. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. The caller ID showed Colonel Richards. I heard about the Secretary's visit, Richards said without preamble. And about his offer. News travels fast. At that level it does. What are you thinking? Maya sighed. I'm thinking that I'm not a politician, I'm a teacher. No. Richards corrected gently. You're a leader who happens to teach. There's a difference. The tremors have been worse lately, Maya admitted. The doctors say it's stress-related. Moving to Washington, working directly with the President's team, that's a different kind of pressure. Maya, do you remember what you told that young lieutenant in your class last month about your hands? She smiled despite herself. I told him that steady hands are overrated. It's a steady mind that matters. Exactly. The President doesn't need someone with perfect penmanship. He needs someone with perfect clarity about what's at stake in every intelligence assessment. After they hung up, Maya took a long walk around the base. The desert night was cool and clear, the stars brilliant overhead. She thought about her journey from the mountains of Montana to the Pentagon's inner circles. From a young woman learning tracking from her grandfather to potentially advising the President on intelligence matters that could shape global events. Had any of it been according to plan? No, but perhaps that was the point. Her grandfather had taught her that the best trackers didn't just follow trails, they anticipated where those trails would lead. They saw patterns others missed. By midnight, her decision was made. 3 weeks later, Maya Jensen stood in the Oval Office, her hands trembling slightly as she presented her first intelligence assessment to the President of the United States. But her voice was steady, her mind clear. Mr. President, what makes this situation particularly complex isn't just the technical intelligence. It's the ethical dimensions that extend beyond our immediate security interests. The President, known for his impatience with long briefings, leaned forward with unusual interest as Maya outlined not just the facts, but the human implications of different response options. When she finished, he nodded slowly. You know, Major Jensen, I've had intelligence officers brief me every morning for 3 years. This is the first time one has helped me understand not just what we know, but what it means for real people. That's the heart of ethical intelligence, sir. Not just collecting information, but understanding its human dimension. Over the following months, Maya's role expanded beyond what even the Secretary had envisioned. Her ethical framework became a required component of all high-level intelligence assessments. Intelligence agencies that had spent decades focusing almost exclusively on data collection and analysis now found themselves required to evaluate the human impact of their findings and recommendations. It wasn't always smooth. Old habits died hard, and many veteran intelligence officers resisted what they saw as unnecessary hand-wringing. But Maya's quiet persistence, combined with her unquestionable operational credentials, gradually won over even the most hardened skeptics. The point isn't to make intelligence gathering more difficult, she explained during a particularly tense meeting with agency directors. It's to make intelligence use more effective. An operation that achieves its tactical objective, but creates strategic blowback, isn't a success. It's a failure of planning. A year into her new role, Maya received an unexpected visitor at her Pentagon office. Lieutenant Commander Santos, now a full commander, had been assigned to the Joint Chiefs Intelligence Staff. "Ma'am," Santos said after they'd exchanged greetings, "I need to tell you something. That operation in the South China Sea last year, the one you analyzed with your team when the Secretary visited. What about it? We implemented your recommendation. The multi-phased, de-escalation first approach. It worked exactly as you predicted. Not just the tactical elements, but the regional stability impacts. The Joint Chiefs were so impressed. They've made it a case study at the War College." Maya smiled. "That's not my success, Commander. That's the success of ethical intelligence thinking. The credit belongs to every officer who contributed to that analysis." "With respect, ma'am, you're wrong. Yes, we all contributed. But without your framework, we'd have been analyzing pieces of a puzzle without seeing the whole picture. You taught us to see patterns that matter beyond the data points." That evening, as Maya finished her daily report, her assistant delivered a small package that had arrived by courier. Inside was a weathered compass, along with a note. "Found this while cleaning out Grandpa's cabin. He always said a good tracker needs 3 things: keen eyes to see what's there, a compass to know true north, and wisdom to know which trails are worth following. Thought you could use it in Washington. You're giving a compass to a nation." Sarah Coleman. Maya held the compass in her trembling hands, feeling the connection to her grandfather and the wilderness lessons that had shaped her approach to intelligence work. The tremor in her hands had never gone away. In fact, the pressures of her new position had made it more pronounced at times. But she had come to see it as a reminder of the human cost of the decisions she helped frame, a physical manifestation of the weight of responsibility. 2 years into her Pentagon role, Maya was invited to address the graduating class at the Fion Glass, at the Kaunde class at the Intelligence School. Standing before the next generation of intelligence officers, she saw in their eager faces the future of American security, a future she had helped reshape. Intelligence work has traditionally been evaluated on 2 criteria. She told them: accuracy and actionability. Is the information correct, and can we use it? But those criteria are insufficient for the complex world you're entering. True intelligence excellence requires a 3rd dimension, ethical assessment. Not just can we do something, but should we? Not just will this action achieve its immediate objective, but what ripple effects will it create? You are inheriting an intelligence community that is learning to ask these questions systematically, not as an afterthought. The frameworks you've been taught here aren't theoretical exercises. They're being applied daily at the highest levels of government. Some of you will gather intelligence in dangerous places. Others will analyze it in secure facilities. Still, others will present it to leaders who make life or death decisions based on your work. But all of you will face moments where technical skill alone isn't enough, where your character and judgment will determine whether intelligence becomes wisdom or merely information. My grandfather taught me that the most skilled tracker isn't the one who follows the most trails, but the one who knows which trails matter. As intelligence officers, your challenge isn't just to collect more information, it's to understand what truly matters in the deluge of data. When my hands began to tremble after Operation Sandstone, I thought my career was over. I couldn't hold a weapon steadily, couldn't type without errors, couldn't even pour coffee without spilling it. But I discovered that my value wasn't in my hands, it was in my mind and heart. Some of you will face similar challenges, physical, emotional, or psychological wounds that seem to limit your capabilities. When that happens, remember that your greatest contribution to national security may not be what you initially envisioned. Your scars and limitations may guide you to exactly where you're needed most. The supply clerk with trembling hands had more to offer than anyone realized, including herself. Don't let anyone's perception of your limitations or your own define your service. Let your character and wisdom be your true weapons, sharper and more powerful than any rifle could ever be. As she concluded her address, the auditorium erupted in a standing ovation. Among the faculty and distinguished guests, she spotted familiar faces: Colonel Richards, now General Richards; Sarah Coleman, now a lieutenant colonel; and even Captain Reynolds, who had found redemption as an ethics instructor at the intelligence school. Later that evening, at a small gathering of former students and colleagues, Maya found herself surrounded by the ripple effects of her work officers whose careers and approaches had been transformed by her teachings, who were in turn transforming others. "I have a confession to make," said a voice behind her. Maya turned to find Lieutenant Rodriguez, now Major Rodriguez, smiling sheepishly. "Remember when you first came to Fort Campbell? I was one of the worst offenders. I used to make jokes about your hands behind your back. Water under the bridge, Major." "Maybe, but here's the thing. I now teach a module on unconscious bias in intelligence assessment at the Command and General Staff College. I use my own behavior toward you as the primary case study. Hundreds of officers have learned from my mistakes." Maya smiled. "Then it was worth it. That's how change happens, not just through successes, but through failures that become learning opportunities." As the gathering wound down, Maya found herself alone with General Richards on the patio, overlooking the training grounds where new intelligence officers practiced their craft. "Penny for your thoughts, Major?" Maya watched a group of students working through a complex scenario, their faces intent with concentration. "I'm thinking about my rifle." Richards raised an eyebrow. "Your rifle?" "Yes, the one that supposedly had 200 confirmed kills." "Ah, the rumors." Maya nodded. "After that first day at Fort Huachuca, someone started a story that I'd been a covert operator, not just a planner. That my supply clerk cover was deep cover for a sniper with 200 confirmed kills. The tremor in my hands was supposed to be from the psychological toll of so much killing. Military mythology at its finest," Richards chuckled. "And entirely false, of course. Of course, I've never killed anyone. I planned operations where others did the fighting, but my hands never pulled a trigger in combat. Does it bother you, the false legend?" Maya considered the question carefully. "Not anymore. At first it did. It seemed to undermine everything I was trying to teach about ethical intelligence. But then I realized something important." "What's that?" "People need stories that help them make sense of change." The military wasn't ready to accept that its intelligence paradigm was being reshaped by a supply clerk with shaky hands. But a legendary ghost operator whose hands trembled from the weight of her actions. That was a story they could understand. It gave them permission to listen to what I was actually saying. Richards nodded thoughtfully. "And now the story?" "Doesn't matter. The principles have taken root. A generation of intelligence officers is being trained to think ethically first, technically second. The trembling hands have transformed more lives than any steady trigger finger could have." As the sun set over Fort Huachuca, casting long shadows across the training fields where future intelligence officers learned their craft, Maya Jensen thought about the unlikely journey that had brought her here. From a Montana mountain girl learning tracking from her grandfather to a Pentagon advisor reshaping national intelligence policy. From a supply clerk mocked for her trembling hands to a respected leader whose ethical framework guided presidential decisions. Some heroes charged into battle with steady hands and deadly accuracy. Others quietly transformed institutions with wisdom, patience, and moral clarity. Both kinds of heroes served with honor. Both kinds of heroes made their country proud. And sometimes, if they were very fortunate, both kinds of heroes got to see the lasting impact of lessons learned from a wilderness tracker who understood that the most important trails weren't those left by deer or bear, but by the choices we make and the lives we touch. True strength didn't come from a steady trigger finger. It came from a steady moral compass that guided you through the wilderness of difficult choices. Excellence didn't need to announce itself with gunfire. It just needed to be ready when called. Upon ready to serve, ready to teach, ready to transform. 5 years after her appointment as Special Advisor for Ethical Intelligence Assessment, Maya Jensen stood at a crossroads in her career. The tremor in her hands had worsened with age, but her mind remained razor-sharp. She had accomplished more than she'd ever dreamed possible, transforming how intelligence was gathered, analyzed, and presented at the highest levels of government. The Jensen framework was now standard curriculum at every intelligence school in the nation, and elements had been adopted by allied nations worldwide. But a new challenge had emerged. The President was establishing the Permanent Ethics and Intelligence Commission, with oversight authority across all 16 intelligence agencies, and he wanted Maya to chair it. This would mean stepping beyond advisory capacity into a true leadership role with the power to shape policy, not just recommend it. Major Jensen, the President said during their private meeting in the Oval Office, or should I say Colonel Jensen, given the promotion that would accompany this appointment. Maya smiled. Sir, I've been comfortable as Major for quite some time now. Well, that comfort zone is about to expand. This commission isn't window dressing, Maya. It will have real teeth budget review authority, operational oversight, training standards enforcement. I need someone who understands intelligence from the inside, but maintains the ethical perspective that's become your trademark. Mr. President, I'm honored, but I have concerns. The agencies will resist centralized ethical oversight. They'll see it as interference in operational autonomy. The President leaned back in his chair. Of course they will. That's precisely why I need you. Anyone else would either capitulate to that resistance or create such adversarial relationships that the Commission would become ineffective. You have the unique ability to challenge intelligence professionals while maintaining their respect. May I ask why now, sir? The President's expression grew serious. Because we're entering a new era of intelligence challenges. Artificial intelligence systems are beginning to generate and analyze intelligence at volumes humans can't comprehend. Deepfake technology has made verification increasingly difficult. Non-state actors have access to capabilities once limited to major powers. The ethical frameworks that guided us in previous decades are insufficient for what's coming. Maya nodded thoughtfully. And you believe I'm the right person to develop these new frameworks? I know you are. Your grandfather taught you to track in the Montana wilderness. Operation Sandstone taught you to plan in the fog of war. Your time as a supply clerk taught you humility and perspective. Your years teaching at Fort Huachuca taught you how to transfer knowledge. And your role here at the Pentagon has taught you how systems of power operate. There's literally no one else. With your unique combination of experiences. That evening, Maya called the person whose opinion she valued most in professional matters, now Lieutenant General Richards, recently appointed Vice Chief of Staff of the Army. A commission with actual authority, Richards mused after hearing the details. That's unprecedented in the intelligence community. There will be significant pushback. I know. That's why I'm hesitating. Are you hesitating because you doubt your ability to handle the resistance, or because you doubt the value of the mission? Maya paused, considering the question carefully. Neither, actually. I'm hesitating because I'm wondering if I've done enough. If it's time for someone else to carry this forward while I focus on training the next generation. Maya, Richard said gently, you've spent your entire career avoiding recognition. First as a planner who let others take credit for her operations. Then as a supply clerk hiding your capabilities. Even in your current role, you've consistently downplayed your influence. At some point, leadership isn't just about doing the work, It's about standing visibly for principles so others can rally around them. My hands are trembling more than ever. Yes, I know. And that makes you even more powerful as a symbol. The intelligence community hell. The entire military needs to see that physical perfection isn't a prerequisite for exceptional leadership. Your tremor isn't a weakness. It's a reminder of the human cost of the work we do. It makes you more effective, not less. After they hung up, Maya walked to the window of her Pentagon office, looking out at the Washington Monument illuminated against the night sky. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, each step preparing her for challenges she couldn't have imagined. Her grandfather's voice seemed to whisper in her ear, "The best tracker doesn't just follow trails, they understand where those trails lead and why they matter." The next morning, Maya walked into the president's office with her decision made. "Mr. President, I accept the position, but with 3 conditions." He raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." "First, the commission must include representatives from every agency it oversees, people who understand the operational realities of intelligence work." "Agreed. That makes sense." "Second, our mandate must explicitly include educational components. We're not just enforcing standards, we're helping develop the ethical capacity of the entire community. That's why I want you for this, Maya. Continue." "Third, and most importantly," she paused, her hands trembling visibly on the arms of her chair, "I want to establish the Jensen Fellowship for Disabled Veterans in Intelligence Services. A program that identifies veterans whose physical limitations might disqualify them from traditional roles, but whose minds and experience would be invaluable in intelligence analysis and oversight." The president smiled slowly. "Using your own story to create opportunities for others. I should have expected nothing less. Consider all 3 conditions accepted." 6 months later, Colonel Maya Jensen stood before the assembled leadership of America's intelligence community, 16 agency directors and their senior staff, to formally launch the Ethics in Intelligence Commission. The room contained some of the most powerful people in national security, and tension was palpable. "I understand your concerns," she began, addressing the elephant in the room. "You're worried this commission will hamstring operational capabilities, that ethical considerations will create bureaucratic hurdles that slow down critical intelligence functions." She let her words hang in the air for a moment, not rushing to reassure them. "Those concerns are valid. If ethical oversight becomes merely another layer of bureaucratic approval, we will have failed in our mission. But that's not what this commission represents." Maya stepped away from the podium, choosing to walk among them rather than speak. From a position of separation. Ethics isn't separate from effective intelligence. It's integral to it. When we fail ethically, we eventually fail operationally. History has proven this repeatedly. Intelligence gathered through torture proves unreliable. Operations that harm civilians create strategic blowback. Analyses that tell leaders what they want to hear rather than what they need to know lead to catastrophic policy failures. She stopped beside the CIA director, a hardened veteran of decades in clandestine operations. "Director Watkins, your agency pioneered human intelligence gathering in environments where traditional approaches failed. That innovation didn't come from ignoring ethical constraints. It came from creative thinking within them. Ethical intelligence isn't about limiting capabilities. It's about developing better ones." Moving to the NSA director, she continued, "Director Chun, your technical collection capabilities expand daily. The ethical frameworks we're developing aren't designed to restrict those capabilities, but to ensure they're deployed in ways that maintain America's moral authority and long-term security interests." Maya returned to the podium, her hands visibly trembling as she gripped its edges. "Some of you have heard rumors about me. That I was once an operator with hundreds of confirmed kills. That my hands shake from the psychological toll of those actions." A murmur ran through the room. "Those rumors are false." I've never killed anyone. I was a planner for Operation Sandstone, not a trigger puller. My tremor developed from neurological stress during those operations, but not from taking lives directly. She held up her trembling hands for all to see. I don't hide these tremors anymore. I don't pretend they don't affect my daily life. They are a physical manifestation of the weight of the decisions we make in intelligence work, decisions that affect real lives, real communities, real nations. This commission exists because every intelligence professional should feel that weight, should understand that our work has consequences beyond the immediate objective, not to paralyze us with indecision, but to ensure we act with full awareness of our responsibilities. The room had gone completely silent, every eye fixed on her trembling hands and unwavering gaze. We will work with you, not against you. We will learn from you, even as we challenge you. And together, we will build an intelligence community that doesn't have to choose between effectiveness and ethics, because the most effective intelligence is inherently ethical. As she concluded, Director Watkins was the first to stand. The career CIA officer, known for his skepticism of oversight, approached Maya directly. Colonel Jensen, I had my doubts about this commission. I still have questions about implementation. But if you're building this around strengthening intelligence rather than constraining it, you have my cooperation. One by one, the other directors offered similar commitments. Not wholesale endorsement, but willingness to engage, to be part of shaping ethical frameworks rather than merely subject to them. Later that evening, Maya met with the first cohort of Jensen Fellows, 15 disabled veterans selected for their exceptional minds and ethical clarity. Some were in wheelchairs. One was blind. Several had prosthetic limbs. 2 suffered from PTSD, so severe they couldn't function in traditional work environments. All of them had been told their service was over, that their disabilities made them liabilities rather than assets. Now they would form the core analytical team for the Ethics Commission, bringing their unique perspectives to bear on the most challenging intelligence questions facing the nation. Each of you has been told what you can't do, Maya told them, her hands steadily trembling as they had for years. Today we begin focusing on what you uniquely can do. Your experiences, both your specialized training and your disabilities, give you perspectives that are invaluable. A young Army veteran in a wheelchair raised her hand. Ma'am, how do we overcome the perception that we're damaged goods? That we're here out of pity rather than capability? Maya smiled. The same way I did. By being so damn good at what you do that your results speak for themselves. By understanding that what others see as limitations are actually unique qualifications for the work that matters most. Over the next 2 years, the Ethics and Intelligence Commission transformed from a feared oversight body to a valued partner. In intelligence operations, Maya's approach integrating ethical considerations into planning rather than imposing them afterward gradually won over even the most skeptical agency directors. The Jensen Fellows became legendary within the community for their analytical insights. Their disabilities, far from hindering their work, often gave them unique advantages. The blind analyst who could hear patterns in data that others missed. The amputee who understood vulnerability and resilience in ways others couldn't. The PTSD sufferer whose hypervigilance made her exceptional at identifying subtle intelligence anomalies. On the 3rd anniversary of the Commission's founding, Maya received a special visitor. Lieutenant Rodriguez, now Colonel Rodriguez, and the commanding officer of the Intelligence Training Battalion at Fort Huachuca, had brought with him a surprising guest, former Captain Reynolds. Ma'am, Reynolds said, visibly nervous as they sat in her Pentagon office. I've spent years trying to make amends for how I treated you at Fort Campbell. Teaching ethics at the intelligence school was part of that journey. Maya nodded encouragingly, but said nothing, letting him continue. I'm retiring next month, and before I do, I wanted to give you something. He placed a small wooden box on her desk. Inside was a brass compass, similar to the one her grandfather had owned. "I know you already have your grandfather's compass," Reynolds said quietly. "This one is different. It belonged to my father, who served in Vietnam. He told me it helped him find his way home when he was lost behind enemy lines. I've kept it as a reminder that even when we're completely disoriented, we can find our way back to what matters." Maya's trembling hands carefully lifted the compass. "Why give this to me?" "Because you did what this compass did for my father. You helped me find my way back to the kind of officer, the kind of person I wanted to be. When I was lost in my own arrogance and prejudice, your example showed me a better path." That evening, after Reynolds and Rodriguez had gone, Maya sat alone in her office, contemplating the two compasses, her grandfather's and Reynolds's, sitting side by side on her desk. Different instruments that served the same purpose, helping people find their way when lost. Wasn't that what her entire career had been about? Not just gathering intelligence or enforcing ethical standards, but helping America's intelligence community find its way through increasingly complex moral terrain. Her phone rang, a secure line from the White House. "Colonel Jensen, the President needs you in the Situation Room immediately. We have a developing intelligence crisis." Within 30 minutes, Maya sat at the Situation Room table with the President and his national security team. A delicate intelligence operation had gone sideways, with American agents at risk and a critical decision needed about how to proceed. The CIA director outlined two options: a high-risk extraction that might save the agents but would compromise years of intelligence work, or maintaining the operation while accepting the potential loss of the agents in the field. All eyes turned to Maya, not because ethics was a secondary consideration, but because it had become central to how this administration made intelligence decisions. Her hands trembled as she studied the intelligence reports, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "Mr. President, this situation perfectly illustrates why ethical and operational concerns cannot be separated. The question isn't whether to prioritize our agents or our intelligence network. It's how to honor our commitment to both simultaneously." She outlined a third approach, one that would require exceptional coordination and creativity, but that offered a path to both protect the agents and preserve the intelligence value. "It's not without risk," she acknowledged, "but it maintains both our operational effectiveness and our ethical commitment to those who serve." The President nodded slowly. "That's why you're in this room, Colonel. Implement the plan." 3 days later, the agents were safely extracted and the intelligence network remained intact. It wasn't the first time Maya's ethical framework had transformed an operational approach, but it was perhaps the most visible demonstration of how thoroughly her influence had permeated America's intelligence community. As she prepared for bed that night, Maya found herself thinking about the supply clerk with trembling hands who had once been mocked at Fort Campbell. How impossible it would have seemed then that she would someday help shape intelligence decisions. In the White House, her grandfather had been right all along. The best tracker wasn't the one who made the most kills or followed the most obvious trails. It was the one who understood which paths mattered and why, who could see patterns others missed because they were too focused on immediate objectives rather than ultimate destinations. The trembling in her hands had never gone away. If anything, it had become more pronounced with time and stress. But that tremor had become something unexpected, not a limitation, but a reminder. A physical manifestation of the truth that intelligence work wasn't abstract. It affected real lives, created real consequences, shaped real futures. 10 years after that fateful day at Fort Campbell, when Colonel Richards had revealed her true identity, Maya Jensen sat at her desk writing a letter. Not an intelligence assessment or policy recommendation, but a personal note to a young soldier who had written to her about his struggle with a disability that threatened his military career. "The Army once saw my trembling hands and decided I could only be a supply clerk," she wrote. They couldn't see that my mind remained my greatest asset. Don't let anyone's perception of your limitations, or even your own, define your service. Your unique experiences, including your disability, give you perspectives and insights that may prove invaluable in ways no one can predict. True strength isn't about physical capability. It's about moral clarity, intellectual honesty, and the courage to stand for what matters when it would be easier to remain silent. Sometimes our greatest contributions come not despite our limitations, but because of them. They force us to find new paths, develop new strengths, see patterns others miss. The supply clerk with trembling hands found her greatest purpose not on a battlefield, but in a classroom and a policy office. Your path will be different, but no less valuable. Find the place where your unique perspective matters most then. Serve there with everything you have. As she signed the letter, Maya thought about all the unlikely turns her life had taken, from the mountains of Montana to the Pentagon's corridors of power. None of it according to plan, all of it somehow preparing her for challenges she couldn't have imagined. Her grandfather's final lesson had been his most important. The trails we follow rarely lead where we expect, but if we maintain our ethical compass and remain true to our deepest values, they lead us exactly where we're needed most. Some heroes stormed beaches with unwavering courage. Others transformed institutions with wisdom, persistence, and moral clarity. Both kinds of heroes served with honor. Both kinds of heroes made their country proud. And sometimes, the most important, battles weren't won with steady hands and deadly accuracy, but with trembling hands and uncompromising ethical vision. Not all victories were counted in enemies defeated. Sometimes the greatest victories were measured in lives transformed, systems improved, and wisdom imparted. The supply clerk with trembling hands had found her true calling, not despite those tremors, but because of what they taught her about human frailty, moral courage, and the kind of strength that matters most. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.